Did you hear that discussion in Fox News about ticket prices for the Super Bowl? Now up to, if you're trying to buy a ticket that someone else might be peddling, for the cheap seats, now up to nearly $10,000. What? I'm sorry. I don't think the experience is quite worth that much. We will talk about football a bit this morning. We're going to be talking with some people about a boxing event taking place this weekend. They'll be joining us in just about 10 minutes right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Top story with Bill Colley, as Mr. Big Voice just informed you a moment ago. We also have a story coming out of Europe about methane, or as the British might call it, breaking wind. And we'll touch base on that in a while. But the football story, I think, is worthwhile to talk about this morning because about 1/3 of Americans will be tuning in on Sunday. That's the estimate to watch that game. I plan to drop by a couple of different places where there are parties going on and just checking out the food and a little bit of the game. The game often is anticlimactic. It certainly was last year. Now, there occasionally, Baltimore and San Francisco a couple of years ago really played a great game. And I can remember 3 of the previous Super Bowls with the Patriots. They've been in 5 in the last 15 years. And they've gone back, since their loss in the 1980s under a different ownership. They really have revamped this franchise. But the first 3 times they played in the last 15 years, they won. And all of those were incredibly exciting games, all decided by 3 points. And then they lost a couple of games to the New York Giants. And I don't know, for an inexplicable reason, the Giants just had their numbers. The Patriots' number, that is, a couple of different occasions. Maybe it's the coaching staff in New York has figured out the coaching staff in New England while no one else has. I played football. I started playing football when I was in the 5th grade, organized football. I mean, I played in the backyards, and we used to play across the street from my house when I was a kid with my friends and neighbors, and we would play in an old railroad yard. The railroad tracks went straight by, and there was this big open space where people would come by. You may remember as kids seeing the big railroad cars, the ones that were actually, you could drive on the road, but they would go out onto the tracks to fix things as well. These were big mammoth things in yellow. So they would park them there when they were working on the tracks in the area. But for the most part, they were gone working somewhere else. So we had this big empty lot, which was rocks and some coal and other things that had been ground in there. And that's where we played football. And we played tackle without pads. Today, I guess that would be considered just a terrible thing to do. We thought there was nothing to worry about. You got a bruise now and then, so what? Be a man, get back up. Even when you're a boy, you were thinking, be a man, get back up and get right back in there. And that's how we learned to play. In the 5th grade, I started playing in organized football, and I continued that through high school. I did not go on to college. I just did not have the speed or the eyesight to really make it beyond that, and football is a winnowing process. We may not see in another 10 to 20 years, enough talent available to really fill the ranks in the NFL. And they may be plucking guys of my talent level. And why is that? Because parents don't want kids playing football in some parts of the country any longer. Why? Because it's dangerous. Riding a bicycle is dangerous. Riding in a car is dangerous. Sometimes just walking across the street is dangerous. We still have to do all of those things, or we don't have to do them all, but we often still do them. There are a couple of surgeons writing today at the Washington Times. Their names are Joseph Maroon and Julian Bales, and they're talking about football and their views on the efforts to try to stamp it out. And the writers go on to say organized sports are a bulwark against the very real health risks associated with childhood obesity, such as diabetes, hypertension, and cardiac disease. These benefits are critical to the health and development of our youth, and they serve to show the need for a more balanced approach to how we address the safety of our kids playing contact sports. Why the near hysteria about concussions? Perhaps it's the heartbreak effects that we see with something called chronic traumatic encephalopathy on beloved athletes. And the two both were friends with Mike Webster, the late center for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was on 4 Super Bowl winning teams in the 1970s, died in his 50s. He's in the NFL, or was in the NFL Hall of Fame before his death, but died in his early 50s from this terrible disease that he had from the repeated concussions. He was playing in the center of the line and going head-to-head with a lot of other behemoths, and he was doing this for many, many years. He probably was playing organized football as well from the age of 10 or so, straight up until he was into his mid-30s. The writers say, people wonder how kids are safe if the professionals are not. It is a fair point at first glance, but the data tell us otherwise. Each year, more than 3 million kids play youth football, a million more play in high school, about 70,000 play at the college level, and about 2,500 are professional football players. The medical literature on chronic traumatic encephalopathy reveals that in the past 10 years, a total of 63 football players were diagnosed with it, almost all professional athletes, out of approximately 44 million players. 63 cases out of 44 million. All right, so how dangerous is this game? The writers say fear has created a market for concussion information and products, and the media is overreacting. Ooh, wow, that's never happened before. To sensational but unsubstantiated pronouncements and factoids. I think a lot of it is, too. A lot of people, if you look especially at newspaper reporters, maybe not so much as those folks who are working in radio and TV, but if you look at the newspaper reporters, those were the guys who got stuffed into lockers by the football players when they were kids. Let's be honest about that. Not all of them, but for the most part. They were pushed around. They got wedgies in the hallway. They were afraid to get undressed and shower with everybody else after gym class. And now they're reporting the news, and they're trying to create this idea. You know what it is? They're trying to get back. They're still harboring some, what you call, complexes from their youth. Maybe inferiority complexes. And this is their way to get back at the people they called the jocks. Now, I was a football player, but I wasn't going around stuffing people in lockers. I seemed to get along with everybody really well. Maybe too well. Maybe that's why I wasn't mean enough on the field, and I could have been meaner, I suppose. And maybe that would have overcome some of my my nearsightedness as well as my slow feet when I was out there playing. But I think this is really a lot of people out there, especially among liberals too. They don't like football because football is analogous to war. Now, it's certainly not like war. No one would make that comparison. However, Douglas MacArthur did. You may remember that name. He was a hero of World War II and World War I before that. Douglas MacArthur, also considered running for president in the early 1950s, couldn't find any support really for doing that. But he had stated that he believed football was the greatest training ground for young men if they planned to then later serve in the military. And he said because the game combines two things. It combines the violence that you often see with warfare along with the teamwork. And, you have to be part of the team. You can't be an individual. As well as it's similar to chess with the way that players line up and, you diagram plays and things work. And that gridiron is really just a giant chessboard. I think his point is very, very well taken. But if you are from, let's say, a leftist perspective, you work at a newspaper, or you're the editor of a newspaper, or you work on a college campus, and you're looking around and you're saying to yourself, well, Douglas MacArthur was an evil man because he fought wars. Therefore, football is an evil game. I mean, they make these type of connections, and that's why we end up at this point. On a lighter note, because it is Friday and a lot of people are already in their weekend mode, this is from the Associated Press. A lion at Salt Lake City's Hogle Zoo is picking the Patriots to win the Super Bowl. I guess he tasted some of the Patriots and then tasted some of the Seahawks and just decided, I'll go with New England. They taste better. The lion is named Vulcan. He has taken over Super Bowl prognosticating duties at the zoo after a Utah ape who gained national fame by accurately predicting the winner for 7 years in a row died last year. Well, must have been one very smart ape. Zoo officials say keepers placed 2 papier-mâché helmets in the lion's enclosure Thursday. One was painted with a Seahawks logo. Well, let's face it, it is ugly. It's a butt-ugly uniform. It is one of the ugliest uniforms in all of sports. Perhaps the only thing that really rivals it is what you see the Oregon Ducks wear. It's fitting that they both play in the Northwest, I guess. The other had a Patriots logo on it. Not that that's pretty either. That looks more like a USFL type of thing. The Patriots used to have that beautiful uniform with the red jerseys, and they had the actual Minuteman. He had the tri-cornered hat, snapping the football on the sides of their helmet. And now you see this thing with a big pompadour on the sides of their helmet, and they've added silver. There is no silver in the American flag, for instance, or in any of our patriotic colors. But once they started winning in those colors, with the superstitions in sports, they're not going to be reversing that. They're going to go and stay with what's been successful, and that is wearing the ugly USFL uniform. Officials say Vulcan went straight for the Patriots helmet, pawing at it, and then carrying it around in his mouth. Now, see, that doesn't necessarily mean that he likes New England, does it? If he started pawing it and then he bit it, it could well be that he has visions of Bill Belichick and thinking, this is what I'd really like to do to the man. An orangutan named Eli picked 7 straight winners of the big game before he died in September at age 24 from complications due to breast cancer. There you have it. Now, later in the program, I'm going to ask people who they think may win. I know we have a lot of bandwagon Seahawks fans in this part of the country because once Seattle started winning, people started saying, that's my team. I know how that works. I've seen it happen before. I did not know many San Francisco 49ers fans in the 1970s when you were suffering through Steve Spurrier and Dick Nolan as coach and some of those other troubles that the club had. But then after Bill Walsh came along and San Francisco became really the class of football, all of a sudden there were people all over the country walking around with gold and red jackets and talking as if Joe Montana and Jerry Rice were their best friends, which clearly they weren't. But that happens in sports. Success creates attention, and people, once they like to be associated with a winner. New York Yankees fans are like that, living vicariously through their team for decades and decades and decades. Not so much the last couple of years. They've tanked a bit, but they still have a lot of money, and they may go back and buy another roster of champions and then regain some of that fan base as far as that goes. It's 8:18. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And our temperature started out at 34. We're down to 33, but we're looking at highs in the upper 40s once again today. The weather actually for the next few days through the weekend looks very, very good. There's not really any threat of rain coming up until Tuesday or so of next week. I have already made my pick for the Super Bowl. This all happened before Deflategate really took off. There was a commentary yesterday on Yahoo that says, since teams started being able to bring their own balls, in other words, the league stopped providing them, so the teams bring their own balls for the use on the field, that New England's fumble rate has dropped by about half. It used to be the average of everybody else in the league. So there may be another fact involved with all of that, but they won't have any issues with footballs this Sunday. Believe me, that will be taken care of. I have made my predictions. New England has been able to ride out players who are currently being tried for murder. It has been able to ride out many other their Spygate issues from years ago. The team just seems to keep chugging along. And the reason I'm taking the Patriots this weekend, even though I despise the football franchise, is because they have a guy by the name of Gronkowski, who is absolutely perhaps the best ever to play at his position in football. And they're going to throw to him a lot this weekend. And even Richard Sherman is not going to be able to stop him. He's such a load coming down the field once he grabs the ball. 20 after 8, Bill Colley with you. We're going to be talking a little bit about boxing. So it's kind of somewhat of a sports flavor for our show today. That in a short while, as well as methane and why you shouldn't be eating meat, according to some people on the left. We have been sharing with people the last couple of days a story about some big event coming up. In fact, for a lot of folks who perhaps live in the area, this has become something that they look forward to every year about this time. We have some studio guests with us right now, and we've been talking off air a little bit about, boxing is what the public calls it. If you're actually a boxer, you call yourself a fighter, and it's known as the fight game. It's 8:24. You're listening to Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And the people we're talking with, actually, many of them have a pretty tough background already because they have some skills they picked up in areas like rodeo. But this is an event that's taking place tomorrow. And we've got a couple of guests in studio with us, Bailey and Keaton. First of all, I want to say welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give me a little background on this. You're with a rodeo team, right?
Yes, sir.
At CSI?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, boxing is a pretty difficult game as well, but I think that if you've been bounced off a bull a few times, it's probably similar in a lot of respects.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You know, you're used to taking those hits, and it makes you stronger and tougher, and you're willing to go in there and just give it your all every time.
Now, what is the smoker that comes around? This is a yearly event, right, as far as that goes?
Yep. This is our 38th annual this year.
And you bring in some people who are actually very good fighters, but you also put people in the ring who may think that they have a future at this, right?
Maybe not a future, maybe just the fun of it for 3 minutes.
To see if you can stand up against it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bit like people who go into a lot of these restaurants where they have the mechanical bulls.
Mm-hmm.
And people, a friend of mine, when he went to an FFA convention in high school, went to Kansas City, and he actually got up on the thing and wanted to prove his manhood. And he did pretty well. But that's similar to the same idea. People get in the ring for the same reason.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It could
Yeah.
be it's a good way, I guess, to show off to your friends, but hopefully you win if that's what you're trying to do.
Well, do they draw straws about who they end up fighting?
No, they come in and weigh in, and if you still want to fight, you can come to the Eldon Evans Expo Center and talk to Steve Burney, and he'll get you lined up and get you weighed in, and you can fight. Anyone can fight.
We match the fights by their weight, height, and their skill level. So a 110-pound person isn't going to get matched with a 200-pound person that knows way more about boxing. So it's all about those things.
Tickets are available still, right?
Yes, you can get them from any CSI Rodeo team member, and we'll be at the expo pretty much all day today and tomorrow, obviously. You can get them at Vickers Western Store, the Shoe and Tack Shop in Jerome, Easy Money Pawn and Auto in Burley, and we'll have them at the door tomorrow night, but they're $2 more at the door than they would be before.
And what do they cost total if they get them in advance?
If you get them in advance, the general admission is $10. Reserved bleacher is $13. The reserved floor is $15, as well as the mezzanine up high above the ring, and then $30 for close-up ringside tickets.
And they can get in about, 6 o'clock tomorrow night?
Yes, the doors open at 6.
Yes.
Now, what do the two of you do? Maybe we'll start here with Bailey. What do you do on the team?
I participate in the breakaway roping, the team roping, and the barrel racing.
That's a lot of skill just in roping, right?
Yes.
You don't just develop that over a couple of months.
No. Some people think they can, but there's a lot more to it than just a couple months.
And Keaton, what's your role?
I calf rope and team rope.
And again, once you actually rope the animal, sometimes there's more than one of you on a team, right? But there has to be some agility and strength involved in that too, because that animal doesn't want to be roped.
Yeah, we actually have a workout program that this school recently just hired I guess he's like a personal trainer, and all the teams go to him twice a week, and we work out with him for strength, agility, stuff like that.
I was going to say, when I remember being a teenager one time, I grabbed the hold of a cow had some short horns, and I grabbed her horns while she was in a tie stall, and she rammed my hands back against the tie stall and crushed one of my fingers. And it's a pretty good indication that, you're dealing with something that can be a little dangerous. You have to be very alert while you're doing this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, everything's unpredictable. You gotta know what you're doing for sure.
You two aren't getting in the ring, right? You're just sort of going to stand back and maybe observe?
I'm not. I hope. I love to watch the boxing smoker, but I don't know that I have the toughness to actually do it. But
Keaton, you're going in?
Yeah, I'm stepping in the ring and giving it my all, so we'll see what happens.
Have you done it before?
No, this is my first time actually fighting in the smoker, but we've been doing a lot of training with Kelly Wardell, a lot of professional boxers, and our coaches Steve Burney and Cody. They really help us out a lot.
So in other words, you don't go in there just cold. You have to actually have a little. You've gone through some training in advance.
Oh yeah, we've been training for 2 months now.
Yeah, we started in November, I guess. So
And
it's been a while.
And people wear the headgear while they're in the ring, unlike when you see a heavyweight fight on TV and they don't believe in that sort of thing.
Yeah. We wear headgear.
Which is more difficult? We've only got a short while left. Which is more difficult, fighting or rodeo?
I'm gonna have to just say fighting, because I've been rodeoing ever since I was 3 years old, and it's like second nature to me now. But this fighting stuff, it's all new, and it's giving me a run for my money.
I think they're both challenging in their own separate categories. I think that where you need to be in shape for rodeo, you have to be the same in the boxing smoker too.
Either way, you can get your bell rung in both sports.
Yeah, you definitely can do that.
Well, I'd like to thank the two of you for coming by and really wish you great luck tomorrow too as well.
Well,
Thank you. Hope to see you there.
All right. We've got a break coming up. It's 33 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, we were talking about cattle earlier. Some people say we need to stop eating cattle because, well, they break wind too much. We've got more details on that on the way. I'm just looking up at my TV monitor and and I'm not recommending that you do that. You need to listen to the radio. It's the best thing for you. But I'm looking at the monitor. And one of the all-time great guys, Joe Theismann, is on television right now. I know this because I'll share a couple of stories. A friend of mine was working as a reporter for a radio station 20-some years ago. Theismann was speaking at a local banquet that night. My friend decided to drive to the hotel. He asked the clerk, "Can you call Joe's room and ask him if he'd have time for a short interview?" Theismann said, "Send him right up." My friend ran out of tape. Joe talked so long. And Theismann said to him as he was getting up to leave, Theismann said, "Yeah, I'll stop to talk to people on the street about football, and the next thing I know, I'm 90 minutes behind." So last year, I was at a party at a casino thrown by Police Chiefs Association. I got invited to the thing on Championship Sunday, the day of the two conference championships. And at halftime, I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I hear this voice, and I look up, and there's Joe. He's doing the drawing for the giveaways. We had prizes, door prizes, and raffle prizes, and the like, and all of those things going on. And Joe was actually up there pulling the names out of the bag. And so I walked up to him afterward, and I said to him, not knowing the man at all, I said, "Oh, by the way, I work with one of your former coworkers for Monday Night Football," and named my friend Walt, who used to work on the team behind the scenes at Monday Night Football in the 80s. And Joe turned right around and said, "Yeah, I know him." And there you go. There's no airs about the man, which is nice to see in an athlete or even a retired athlete. He's just one of the most down-to-earth people you could ever meet. Speaking of down to earth, well, actually, it's the things from Earth that are going up into the atmosphere that have some scientists worried in Europe. I came across this at the Daily Caller today. The United Kingdom government, that means, England and then the countries it's conquered and never let go of. The United Kingdom government says that certain methane may bring on, they didn't write methane here, by the way, they wrote another word, but may bring on the apocalypse if you don't all eat healthier. The UK government is telling people to eat less meat to fight global warming, especially meat from sheep and cows, which emit methane when they pass gas. Unfortunately, lamb is the main ingredient for a lot of Greek food. But the UK's Department for Energy and Climate Change, you see, here's something that bothers me about all of this. They have to have an actual Department for Energy and Climate Change. Now, doesn't that say something to all of us right away, that we should think about this and say, these guys are bureaucrats, and they get paid to come up with things. They get paid to issue warnings. They get paid to create things. In other words, hysteria. And they take money from the taxpayers, and they turn around and they do this. And they have to do something to justify their livelihood, so they say, well, cattle flatulence is going to destroy the planet. Specifically, the carbon footprint tool tells people to stop eating ruminant animals, like cows and sheep, because they release methane through their belches and flatulence. I got news for you, so do I. And in fact, it's a good thing that I normally work in this studio all alone, because those two young people in here, they think boxing's tough. The United Nations urged people to reduce meat consumption back in 2006. I remember talking about this story on a radio show that far back. And some skeptic called in and didn't believe me when I said that there was a woman on a commission at the United Nations. She came out and reported that the commission had decided that people around the world should forego meat only twice a week. Eat it just twice a week, and the other 5 days, no meat. And the other recommendation they had was that we should stop all alcohol production. In other words, go back to worldwide prohibition of alcohol. Why? Because the production of alcohol, they believe, is useless calories, empty calories, and we can live without it. And yet, so much of our resources go into producing alcohol. And the other part of this was, well, if we reduced meat consumption to 2 servings per week, then we could better redistribute meat around the world to people who also need it where they don't get much of it. And number 2, the less meat we would eat, the better it would be for the planet, because all of these big animals have to walk around and graze, and we'd all be better off if we would just eat our own lentil beans. Can I tell you something? A little story about my own personal life. I have been battling the bulge for a number of years, ever since I gave up smoking in the 1990s. I tried something 7 or 8 years ago called the Atkins diet, which is mainly a meat diet with some cheeses, but you're not eating a lot of vegetables with this, and fruits were completely out, at least in the 7 weeks that I was doing it. And I did lose a considerable amount of weight. Here's the thing. If I had been eating beans and bananas and apples and green salads, and I'm doing that right now with my life, I am as gassy as all of those cattle. I'm as gassy as any sheep. And I guess it's probably TMI, too much information. But when I was on the Atkins diet and I was actually eating the meat, I wasn't gassy at all. So the trade-off here is if you stop eating the meat and you eat more vegetables, then you're going to replace the methane that all the cattle have been giving off. I'm sorry, but that's the way it works. You would think that these well-paid scientists and bureaucrats in Britain might have figured this one out already. Apparently not. And if they are English, some of them may be Scottish, some would be Welsh, and some may be Irish. It doesn't matter. They're always normally 3 sheets to the wind anyway. If you ever go to those countries, you will discover that beer drinking is considered something, akin to drinking water. They do it all the time. You want to talk about flatulence? In fact, just about every Englishman I've ever known was about the most flatulent person I've come across. Seems to be the nature of the beast. It's 8:39. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A couple of stories coming out of the state capitol. One of those happens to be about that thing called Add the Words. I've got some thoughts on that in just a couple of minutes. Stick around. So I was looking over all of the news coverage today of the legislative committee in Boise that decided to push aside the Add the Words issue for another year. And the coverage, of course, is exactly what you would expect from most of the lefties in media. It's 8:44. Bill Colley with you. 33 right now at our studios. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can listen to us online. Here's the thing that caught my attention with all of this. I was reading the AP copy originally this morning, but AP copy is just generally rehashed from what you find in newspapers and from TV stations, radio stations that may share the copy with the Associated Press. It's a cooperative. And it says that this should not have been a surprise that the vote was 13-4 because this is one of the most conservative legislative committees in the state. And it mentions that the no votes were, to get rid of it, that they were conservative Republicans. Is there a conservative Republican Party that you're aware of? I mean, I know the Democrats, and I know the Republicans. There is a Libertarian Party in some parts of the country. There's a Constitution Party. There's a Communist Party. There's a Socialist Party or two. There's a Green Party. But I have not yet heard of the Conservative Republican Party. But you see, from the standpoint of the people who are reporting the news, if you're a Republican, then you're a conservative. You're a right-wing extremist, right? You're just not a Republican. You're a conservative Republican. And that may describe them. I'm not knocking that. It may, in fact, some of them may like that description. But the opponents who voted in the minority, they were just Democrats, you understand. They're not flaming lefties whatsoever. No, they're normal. You see, you Republicans are the abnormal ones. And then I looked at a photograph online after the decision yesterday, and there were pictures of 2 women who were bawling about the fact that they didn't get what they wanted. And my initial thought was, the public relations of all of this, they broke down and cried about this? Really? Did someone say, all right, cry here? All right. Camera's off. Oh, okay. So everyone rushes up and gets the pictures. That's supposed to be dramatic. From a public relations standpoint, the people who should be crying should be at least a little more sympathetic. And I'm not saying that I am not a knockoff of Cary Grant when it comes to looks. So I'm not usually hired to be a cover model. And so when I see people who are used for these purposes, from a public relations standpoint, they may have done a little bit better. But media couldn't wait to rush up there and get the photographs of these crying women. Oh, look how terrible this is. Those conservative Republicans made these women cry. That's what they're telling us, right? And they're not reporting the news. That's got nothing to do with it. They're trying to skew the news. They're trying to skew public opinion. That is what media's job has become in this country. The establishment media is simply out to remake civilization in the image it believes is right. And that's what we're stuck with. And that's why they don't like people like me coming along saying, hey, wait a minute. There's an old adage I used to use when I used to talk on a previous radio show, before I ran afoul of all of the liberals there and politicians and the like. I used to say, if you're running a shop on Main Street and you're running this store, and you're having a decent business, and you notice one day there's a guy moving in across the street into an empty storefront, and the guy is setting up shop, and you're thinking, he's got his pitchfork, and he's got a tail, and he's got a couple of horns coming out of his red forehead. I wonder who that guy is. And it suddenly becomes aware that, at least apparent to you, that the devil is setting up shop and running a store across the street. But as long as you stay silent about it, the devil doesn't really care. And the devil just goes about his business and you go about your business. But one day you go out onto the street and you start shouting at everybody passing up and down the street, "Hey, don't go in there, that's the devil." The devil's going to get really, really angry with you. And the way I see it, when you call out people in establishment media and you're working in conservative talk radio, we could call it that, or right-of-center talk radio, or traditional talk radio, you're a traditionalist, a constitutionalist. You have certain values that have been shared by Judeo-Christian peoples for 2,000 years, and you start calling them out, they get really, really angry with you. I have been there, I have seen it, I have put up with it for at least a dozen years, but you know what? I can't give up. I've got to keep telling people exactly what they're selling out of that shop. Yesterday, I happened to catch some video from the Fox website after I got home from work. Speaking of how you badly manage a public relations event, could anybody in their right minds ever make Henry Kissinger look like a sympathetic character? The Code Pink crowd, that also stands for Communist Party if it used the same acronym, they went charging. First of all, is there security on Capitol Hill? These people had big banners and signs and handcuffs and were screaming and yelling. How do you get all of that through security at the Capitol? And they were screaming that Henry Kissinger came in to testify before a committee, and these people were screaming and yelling, and then some woman starts saying, "I arrest you in the name of the people of Chile." Well, wait a minute. Did she actually know if that's what the people of Chile wanted? Has she been there and consulted them? Did she get a show of hands? I had some friends from my last church, and one of them, she was a native of Chile, and her husband, her brother, had been one of the admirals in the Chilean Navy, and she used to tell me, she said, "Don't let these lefties snooker you." I mean, it wasn't like that. But how can you go around claiming you represent all of the... When we now arrest you in the name of the people of Vietnam. Really? Why aren't they there then? Why is it some, hippie college professor with stringy hair who hasn't had a bath in 40 years who's actually making the arrest? I didn't quite from a public relations standpoint, they made a man look like Henry Kissinger, who really is a scoundrel. They made him look really, really good and sympathetic. He's 91 years old. Here's this old man sitting there just, he's nonplussed by the whole thing going on around him. Give John McCain some credit when he called these people scum. At least he recognized them for what they happen to be. 10 minutes now from 9 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, 33 right now. And you can reach our program by dialing us up at 736-0300. That's 736-0300. You can also email me at bill.colley, that's Colley, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, if you'd like to do that. I was talking a bit about what took place in Boise. The new schools chief was there and saying that schools needed another $87 million and some spare change for operations in the coming school year. And she's likely going to get it this time around. I say that because legislators have hinted that they're a little concerned about the way education is going in the state. But I think it raises a question. Why don't we turn the money around and use it on vouchers? We'll get into that in the next hour. But in the meantime, you're on the air and just looking want to know what's on your mind on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Tell you what's on my mind. Your conversation about this legality thing that's been voted down. We already know that there is laws on the books for discrimination. And they want to add more laws to get more clubs to beat up on people, whether they're discriminating or not, just to make them feel that way. And I don't think we need that. And I don't think anybody on that other side has ever put out the stats or even know the stats. Let's talk about minimum wage. What is it? 1.5% people actually operate on a minimum wage, and those 1.5% are 25 years and younger.
Yeah.
And what is the gay community? 15% of the whole earth? How come the minority
It
is
may not
trying
be.
to force stuff down the majority's throat when the majority is not trying to force it down their throat.
Well, there was a research done in Canada a few years ago, and the gay community was considered only to be 2% of the Canadian population. And if you extrapolate, that in the United States would only be a very small amount of people. But you know what? Squeaky wheel gets the grease. Although that may not necessarily be the politically correct statement to use in that situation. And my apologies, by the way, to anybody's feelings who may be hurt today. And if you're still pouting about it, take a Valium, or a Zoloft or something. You'll feel much, much better afterwards. I want to thank him for the telephone call. He mentions minimum wage. I had an email from a friend I used to work with. Haven't seen in many, many years. But in the email this morning, and my friend works in a nursing home, and says that the nurses' aides are making maybe $10 an hour. And they get yelled at by the patients. Some of them get smacked by the patients. And she said, these people have a really tough job, and yet people who are flipping hamburgers at McDonald's want $15 an hour. Yeah, how difficult is that? And when I got my very first job, payroll job, I'd worked a lot of different jobs, farm jobs, and working out of an uncle's business and helping out around the neighborhood, shoveling walks and doing things like that. But my very first payroll job when I was a teenager paid me $2.65 an hour. And when I wanted more money, and I knew there were people who were making a lot more money than I was, but I didn't think I was going to get a lot at the age of 16. I didn't think that anyone would go, well, you got a lot of experience washing dishes, so we'll give you $5 an hour. I took the $2.65 an hour. You know how I got extra money for gasoline and things that I wanted? I worked more. Whenever they called me on the phone and said, hey, somebody is sick today, can you come on in? And if I had the time and I didn't have a school obligation, I went. That's I doubled my expected pay that way by just working twice as much. That doesn't seem to appeal to people anymore either. I mentioned school choice just quickly. If we could, I'll get it out of the way now. We have a request from the schools commissioner here in the state of Idaho, and she would like another additional $87 million and some change in school spending, nearly a 7% increase for next year. And they're likely going to see it happen. The governor favors it. And a lot of people feel that the schools have been neglected for a long, long time. But what if we were to turn around and give that money to the public and tell them, here's a voucher, choose where you want your children to go to school? Would we get better schools that way? If we had increased competition. There is a church school not far from where I live right now, about 3 blocks away, and I walked by it the other day. They're doing a big fundraiser on February 28th. And it struck me that the kids coming out of that school at St. Edward, probably come out of there years ahead of what their competition has over in the public schools. And I know that may rankle some people who administer or teach in public schools, but I've got to be honest with you. I have seen it my entire lifetime. And if people had choices they could make where they could send their children to schools that they thought would be best, wouldn't these kids get a better education? You'd break the backs of the unions that are really more concerned about wages than they are about actually educating kids. You'd say, and governors all around the country are starting to recognize that, no matter what political party they're from. But you would be able to do that. It's just my thinking is, instead of continually giving schools more and more money, we'll get broadband and, we'll have a couple more teams kids can play on so they can become self-actualized in the course of their years in school. Why not actually have them just doing things like learning? When you've got people in Japan, kids are going to school 6 days a week. They're not going for 6 hours. They're going sometimes for 10 hours. You've got parents actually paying for extra time to send their kids to schools. Why? Because there's so much to know in this world and so little time to know all of it. We've got to be more competitive. And if you had this opportunity to do this where you could, instead of having your taxes raised every year, just take that money, your own money, and put that into a school where you thought your children would get the best education. And you wouldn't have to worry about Planned Parenthood teaching sex ed in your schools. You wouldn't have to worry about those things because you could choose a school where they did a very traditional education. But you, as an individual, would have that choice. And choice is nothing more than a synonym for liberty. And so you could make that choice for your children. And then your children could make choices of their own along the way. Believe me, when you're the parent, it's not a democracy, though. I used to remind my own daughter of that years ago. She did not have a vote. She could express her opinions. She's like Eleanor Holmes Norton. who's the delegate in Congress from Washington, D.C. She can sit there, she can get up and make a lot of noise, but no, she does not have a vote. And that's what I used to tell my daughter. You don't necessarily get to have a lot of input on this. But I did have her best interest at heart. That was what I was trying to explain at the time. We're coming up on 8:58. Do want to point out one more hour of the program ahead. Hey, in the next hour, if I get a chance, I'd like to know what some of your predictions are for the big game on Sunday. Who would you? Well, you can tell me who you'd like to win, and then you could tell me who you think will win. They may not be the same thing. Bill Colley with you until 10 o'clock this morning. Rush will come on following 10 o'clock news. Sean Hannity following the news at 1 o'clock. And then Glenn Beck this afternoon. Unless, of course, they're all taking the day off and they have their usual substitutes in. One of the Marks could be in for Rush this morning. Seems to be lately he's been taking some more time off. And if he's going to the big game this weekend, too, that may well be the case. He may not be on the air come Monday because of that. That's been a pattern for him in recent years. It's 8:58, as I mentioned, 33. Bill Colley with you. Top story, News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Well, if you did not hear it in the 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock newscast from Fox, Mitt Romney has said he will not be a candidate. He's been flirting with the idea of running for president again. Mitt Romney says he will not be a candidate next year. And apparently just the staff that Jeb Bush had put together decided the case for Romney. And he's made the announcement this morning he will not do it. Now, I was looking over the numbers. Fox put up some numbers today. If the election hypothetically were held today and it featured Mitt Romney versus Hillary Clinton, they would be in a dead heat. If it was Rand Paul and Hillary Clinton, Rand Paul is only 2 points behind. And then the other Republicans stacking up against her, if she is indeed her party's nominee, are showing numbers that are considerably less as challengers. But let me bring this up. This is not Election Day 2016. That is a long, long ways off. We're still 22 months or so away from that. And she has what you might call high negatives. I think that when she actually gets into the race, that there's going to be a lot more discussion about Libya and Benghazi and some of the other shenanigans that took place while she was in the job as Secretary of State. The media will ignore everything about her from the 1990s, Whitewater, and the profit she made in livestock in one day with the Chicago Board of Trade. They'll ignore all of that. They'll say, oh, that's old news. They'll dredge up anything that you did as a child if you're a Republican. You know, oh, you spit on the sidewalk once. But they will not do it to her. They'll claim it's old news. However, I just don't think she's a very attractive candidate. And I'm not even talking about her looks. I think that Republicans, any Republican, can beat her, pretty much. Any Republican, except maybe a Jeb Bush, who also comes into this. And he's got the family name, and right now there's a lot of fatigue with the Bush family, and people don't feel that he's the guy. Conservatives don't like him. They don't want anything to do with him. I really think that it's going to be someone along the lines of a Bobby Jindal, who sort of comes from the back of the pack. We see this. I've been watching politics since the first race I really remember well was in 1968. And of course, Richard Nixon had been written off for politically dead twice, 1960 and 1962, when he got elected president. Romney, though, is an interesting story. And I don't know, some of you may have some thoughts on this, too, as well. You can give me a telephone call at 736-0300. I mentioned it yesterday. Romney and Mike Huckabee, these are two people who are actually very nice guys. And because of that, I don't think that they make great politicians, because no matter how you believe or what you believe and how strongly you believe in it, you've got to make certain compromises, and you've got to play rough and tumble in order to get through this. And Rand Paul, I think, has learned that. And I think he's learned it very quickly, probably from watching what his dad went through over the years. But I'm looking at these names. I may end up just voting for a Constitution Party candidate if I'm allowed to do that in 2016 and simply forego the Republicrats at that point. But I don't see Chris Christie being a guy who could win a presidential election. I don't see Jeb Bush as being the guy. But these are the people that the party, the people at the top of the party, that is the big donors and the people who actually run the country, Those are the guys they want. Now, you've got to be asking yourselves, why do they want one of those guys? Well, they want one of those guys because those guys will do their bidding. They're not so sure about everyone else. Not at this point. But Mitt Romney, again, was a really nice guy, and he had a great track record cleaning up the Olympic Games. The fact that he made money, I didn't know that was a crime. The guys who actually worked with him when he was working in the investment game say that he gave out bonuses one year to all of the staff members, and one of the staff members went out and bought himself a $90,000 car. Romney continued during that stretch to drive his old station wagon to work every day. One day the guy at work said, "Come on, Mitt, I'll give you a ride." So they jumped into the sports car and they sped off and they went down the streets and around a couple of blocks and they came back, stopped in front of the office. And Mitt just shook his head and said, "Boy, gee, I wish I could have one of these." Now, he's worth about $150 million. He could have had one of those, but it's just not his way. He preferred driving the old station wagon back and forth to work. He's that type of a family guy, and I think people missed that in him. When they kept trying to portray him as being, and then you hear, well, he's a terribly rich man, he can't sympathize with the poor. Oh, give me a break. $150 million in America today. Yeah, that's more than I'll ever see, but you know what? He wasn't in the super rich. He was nowhere near that category. There are other candidates who've been far wealthier who have been running for office for years, and some of them serving in high office. So this notion that he was somehow completely out of touch, and he earned that money. We need to point that out too. He earned it. And when he said that 47% of Americans were loafers, what he was trying to point out is half the country is getting some sort of transfer payment from the government. That is, money that is taken from someone else, bundled into checks, and then given to you. And I don't care how you slice it, whether it's Social Security or disability, and I know people say, well, I need that. But you're still getting a check because someone else took money from some other neighbor and then turned around and gave it to you. And if you say, yeah, but I paid into Social Security, no, you paid a tax. That's all you did. So what Mitt Romney was saying was perfectly clear, and it was the truth. Half of America gets some sort of check from the government. Now, if you don't like calling it welfare because it makes you hurt your feelings and it makes you feel that you're down there with a lowlife, fine. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it blue, green, or red if you like. But you are getting a check that you didn't necessarily, it came from someone else and that you didn't necessarily always earn. And this notion that I earned it or I paid into it, life doesn't work that way. Life does not work. Some woman called me on a radio show one time and said, I'm getting my Social Security no matter what. I said, well, you and whose army? If it's not there when you get to retirement age, how are you going to go get it? I don't think she had an answer for that. So I just think that Mitt Romney was treated terribly by news media in this country. And unfortunately, and look, I'm not sitting here saying that I'm totally behind the Republican establishment. I'm not. But I do think the country would be a darn sight better today had he actually been elected than what we ended up with. Yes, is Mitt Romney a Wall Street guy? Yes. Do they have too much power and influence? Yes. But with what we're going through right now, you heard today, after all the bragging about the end of the year last year when we had a big spike in the economy in the fourth quarter, and there was talk that you've been hearing it from Chris Matthews and all of the other talking heads on television and the newspaper columnists who are fellow travelers with the White House about how it's turned around and, there's no way that Republicans will ever win again. And extremists on the right, they consider all of us to be the same as the Republicans. They say that, we're a dying breed and that's the end of it. Well, the economy tanked again. Yeah, it's the growth rate. I saw the bulletin this morning just before I went on the air. And even though we had unemployment claims that were very low this past week, again, that goes back to the fact that there are a lot of people out there who simply aren't collecting any longer. They're not being counted. The actual labor force participation, the lack of people who are actually working, is still at an all-time high. We're not out of the woods. And unfortunately, at least the guy cleaned up the Olympic Games when they were a mess. Maybe he had the right ideas when it came to cleaning up some of this mess. We have a caller with us at 736-0300. That's the number on Top Story. And Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310 and newsradio1310.com. And you're on the air.
Bill, this is one of those situations where I got to remind everybody again that anytime the left says something that the right is doing or the situation of our economy or anything else, the very opposite is happening, and they're doing it to try and distract what's going on and make themselves look good.
I just remember Mitt Romney saying during some of those debates that Russia was a threat. And he was talking about the Middle East and Mr. Obama laughing and poo-pooing all of that. And you know what? You had the moderators in those debates who were basically going along with the president. They were on his team. Thank you for the call. Candy Crowley actually ended up apologizing after one of the debates. She cut Mitt Romney off when he was making a really good point because, well, he was disagreeable. He wasn't agreeing with his master in chief, Barack Hussein Obama. And so therefore she chopped Romney off at the knees. And then later, when she was questioned about it, she said, oh, yeah, well, that was a mistake. But you didn't hear that much. Not many people were watching her give the apology. There were a lot more people watching the debate who thought, oh, that dang fool Romney. Ha, ha, ha. I'm glad that handsome Candy Crowley cut him off. 9:16, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. 33, we've been holding steady and quite a bit of fog around the area. I could see it. I went out to get a glass of water during the 9 o'clock news, and I could look out the window and see a lot of it spread out over the field. So just a warning, if you're driving, you may hit some spots where visibility is going to be a little tight this morning. We are in such a crisis in this country. I mentioned it the other day. Ruth Marcus, whom I actually know, columnist at the Washington Post, and she's a liberal. She admits it, although she's starting to see the world a little differently. Ruth, a few months ago, had a column where she talked about marijuana legalization in this country, and she fessed up that as a youngster, she used to smoke it like it was no tomorrow. But she said making it legal will only make it more common, even though libertarians say otherwise. But it will only lead to more problems, more health problems, more laggards who won't get off the couch. And she said it's a bad, bad idea. And just the other day, she had a column saying, and she's been one of President Obama's biggest backers, but she was saying, hey, look, the guy doesn't know how to control this debt situation. And she was warning her fellow lefties that you just can't keep printing money. It doesn't work that way. You can't keep borrowing it from China. It doesn't work that way. But you know what? She's few and far between. And now that she's been writing lately, she's maybe seeing the light. You will not see her getting any appearances on television as a talking head any longer. They won't want her around because she won't sit there and continue the narrative that they want to hear. We're in a very perilous and dangerous time. And unless, and maybe there's no way. Louis Zamperini, they just you may have seen the movie about him, where he was the Olympic runner who ended up in World War II, got shot down, floated in the ocean for 47 days or so, captured by the Japanese, tortured, and just dehumanized for several years before he was released at the end of the war. Before he died last summer, he gave an interview, and I was reading the interview in the newspaper a few months ago when the movie first came out. And he just said he had no hope whatsoever for this country that he loved so much. He was nearly 100 years old. He'd seen so much. He'd survived so much that most of us have never seen before. But he just said, this debt is insurmountable. And because of that, the Chinese are going to start calling our note, and we just simply don't have any recourse left. And people who sit there and say Republicans or even people on the far right are mean-spirited when we bring this up, give me a break. You know, I'm sorry. We're telling the truth. And if we get to the situation where it's like Greece in this country and people are giving their children away because they can't any longer afford to feed them and they can't afford to eat and there's no jobs, I'm going to tell you what, you don't want to live like that. And you've got to turn around and ask these people on the left why they're leading us in that direction and why they are in such denial. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock. We will not get a candidate, probably, in either of the major parties who is going to solve the problems, I'm sorry to say, in 2016. It may be time that we started thinking about other alternatives. 34, we're up a degree. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Hey, I've got a couple other things I want to mention before we wrap up the program today. Maybe even ask you for a winner on Sunday, just to lighten things up a bit. I love my theme song. Now there's a man who could take over the country and get things done. Although it may not necessarily be in a democratic fashion. No, he will not be asking your permission. And he will not be honoring your requests for more money. 924, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today by giving me a shout. 736-0300. That is 736-0300. A story today in CNBC. A friend of mine found this morning and sent it my way. This is the headline: Under a Mattress in the Freezer, Why So Many Are Hiding Cash. A new survey shows, American Express did a survey that shows people are hoarding cash, stacking it up in mayonnaise jars perhaps and burying it in the backyard, sticking it in mattresses, putting it in various coffee cans and hiding it in places around the house. And of course, financial planners are saying, this is really a bad idea. And the writer missed the point, the big point. Why are people hoarding cash? Well, there was this comment, and maybe they danced around it. They have a quote here. We saw a surge of this back in 2008 when the banking crisis was going on. That came from a fellow named Todd Morris, founder and chief executive of Brickhouse Security. And they sell technology and surveillance solutions. The trend has continued in recent years, he said, with more people installing floor and wall safes to store important documents and cash. What the story never comes right out and says is people lack confidence in the system any longer. Despite whatever they're telling you when you turn on CNBC or MSDNC or CNN or what you read in some of the big East Coast newspapers, what they're trying to tell you is that things are getting better, and you just have to remember, isn't it a shame we can't have a third term of President Barack Hussein Obama? Because the world will just turn, everything will come up roses if we just continue down this path. Yet people are hoarding money. Why are they doing it? Because they don't believe it. And this is the disconnect between institutions in this country and regular people, is that they keep saying one thing, but just because you say it doesn't make it true. That was a criticism of President George W. Bush just a few years ago, was that he would say something and then it would be like, well, I said it, so that is true. But that's not the case, is it? I mean, when you can no longer trust these sources, whether it be government, whether it be people in media, that's a really bad sign for any culture. In the old Soviet Union, they would come out and government would make pronouncements, and everyone knew that they weren't true. And it was just everyone would wink at each other. All right, we know it's not true. But that was the way the system operated. What happened to the old Soviet Union? It doesn't exist any longer. That's what we're flirting with right now with a lot of these difficulties. I'd like to point out you can reach the program today if you are so inclined at 736-0300, 736-0300. And I saw a story today, and we were talking about money that people are making. I saw a story today, and it sort of, I think, is tangentially related to this. In Idaho, according to the figures compiled in 2013, the last full year available right now, women saw a big spike in their pay, nearly 6%. The national average was 2.2%. So this whole war on women trope is, I think, just a bunch of baloney. But men in Idaho in 2013 saw their wages drop nearly 6%. In fact, the average male worker saw a drop in weekly wages of $44. Now, I don't know about you, but $44 buys a lot of gasoline right now. But you don't have that money any longer. What is going on there, and why is this happening? And how can we build a stronger country on all of this? Again, 70% of the U.S. economy happens to be based on consumer spending. And if you're not making as much, you can't go out and spend that. Of course, you spend it, you're buying all of those Chinese electronics. It doesn't necessarily help us out down the road either. And so people, that's why I think they're likely, many of them, putting their money away where they feel it's safe under their own watch. And they don't have to trust these large institutions. They fear perhaps that someone is going to take their money away from them. There was a bill that was floated in Congress, in the House, just about 6 or 7 years ago, where there were actually people who were talking about the government simply would abscond with your 401ks and your IRAs, throw them all into one great big pile, and then divide it up, redistribute it among the people. Didn't matter that the other neighbor squandered all of his savings and you scrimped and saved all your life. You had to share with him. That was the notion. We may be getting back to that. You're up next at 9:28, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on 1310 KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. Referenced the vote in Boise yesterday that declined to add the words and everything else. I just wanted to bring to people's attention that on a site called wallbuilders.com, it shows that in 1782, Congress approved the printing of 10,000 Bibles for the people of the United States. And that being the case, in the Bible, at 1 Corinthians 9 and 10, if I may quote it, says, "Or do you not know that unrighteous people will not inherit God's kingdom?"
I'm aware of it, yes. We've got to get to a break. We've got to get to a break, though. I hate to cut you off, but running out of time in this segment of the program. Good historical fact he's sharing with us. Don't lose track of that. 9:30, 33 right now. Do you have some thoughts on the big game on Sunday? On a lighter note, please share that with me in the coming half hour. So I've been asking a question really a couple of days this week, and I don't have a lot of response on it, which leads me to believe that there aren't, well, I know this is a college football town. I don't have to walk very far without seeing all of the Broncos gear, and it pretty well lets me know that. Go into any store, grocery shopping, and I'm surrounded by the blue and orange. But I would imagine that some of you are planning to watch the game this weekend, or maybe not. Maybe you do some alternative instead. Maybe you have no interest in it whatsoever. And maybe you can tell me what you plan to do if that's the case. 736-0300. Or if you do plan to watch the game, a couple of things come to mind. What's the best place to watch a game like that? What's the best way to do that? What do you eat while you do it? And finally, does anybody out there have a prediction? I've given mine. The Patriots right now are 1-point favorites, and I was saying earlier that this fellow Gronkowski, the tight end, the massive tight end with New England, I think is going to be the difference in the game. Because the team on the other side, Seattle, lost its two best receivers from last year, has managed to get by without them and with great defense. But that great defense has to contend with something the size of a locomotive catching footballs and running upfield. And I think that's where the difference in this game is going to be. And because it's in a stadium in Arizona that can, if the weather's good, they can have the dome open. If the weather's bad, it can be closed. We're not going to have weather have any impact whatsoever on the outcome of this football game. Unless, I guess, the ground shakes. But that's not really weather, is it? The weathermen like to talk about it, but it's got nothing to do with what comes out of the sky. Although let the global warming people go long enough, and they'll claim that there's a causality between global warming and earthquakes, I'm sure. But I said that I was going to take New England, despite the fact I don't like the football team, just because my brain says if I was betting on it, which I'm not, but if I was betting on it, I would go with New England because at this moment I think that they're a more well-rounded football club. And I think that they'll win this game. The line being 1 point right now, I think that they will win. New England's 3 previous Super Bowl victories all were by a field goal. I think that's likely what we're going to see again. I see New England winning this game by 3 points. And I don't think it's going to be, both teams have shown flashes that they can score a lot, but I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring contest. I think the Patriots win this thing by a count, I'll go with like a 27-24. And I don't know if anybody out there would like to argue that point with me, but feel free to do it. I know it's not political, and I know it's got nothing to do with liberals and conservatives and with same-sex marriage and or traditional marriage. But it's Friday, and finally I'm getting into weekend mode, and I know a few other people are out there. I'm going to a couple of different parties for this game, just to sort of get to know people, and so I'll spend part of it at one, and then I'm going to move on to another and catch it that way. Way back in the day when I used to host a really early morning radio show, I used to be on the air at 5 a.m. I couldn't watch the Super Bowl. I mean, I could have, but I would have only gotten about 3 hours sleep afterwards, and that really didn't float my boat. I'm one of those guys, I like to get at least a good 8.5. And this notion that some people, they tell me, well, you know what, I don't bother to sleep much. I can't get much done. You keep shortchanging yourself. It's good for your health. Absolutely. Your sleep bank being deprived like that may kill you, but go right ahead and brag about it. It's like smoking. Sooner or later, it's going to get you. It may not get you right away, but it's likely going to shorten your lifespan at some point. So I used to not watch the game, and I was mentioning yesterday I used to videotape it. I got into work one year, and I walked in, was getting ready for the show, and the producer came in, and he looked at me and he said, "By the way, what'd you think of that wardrobe malfunction?" What? So before I went on air, I had to do, even in those days, you could still do some sort of a computer search and get some details out of it. And I just couldn't believe what had happened during the course of the game. This is supposed to be wholesome family entertainment. Clearly it was not. Clearly somebody there thought, aha, this will get some people's attention. It did, but not in a good way. There were 500,000 complaints to the FCC after that particular situation. And the NFL decided at that point it might have to clean up its act again. I liked it a lot better in the days when you had halftime shows with marching bands. I know people out there, well, yeah, what's the big deal about a marching band going down the field and then turning around and going back the other way and playing tunes on tubas? Well, it didn't mean that you get it done, you get it over with, and they go back to playing football. One of the worst things that's happened in this game is that a team comes into the locker room and they may be hot, really hot. In a normal football game, and I'm talking not like hot in heat, but they are just really, they've got it all going together. They are emotionally into it. They are at the top of their game, and they go into halftime. And in a regular football game, you've got a 13-minute half. You come back out, you tee it all up, and you start all over again. But in the Super Bowl, this halftime show just drags on and on and on, and then usually the people who are performing at halftime, maybe not this year, although Katy Perry, we could see another wardrobe malfunction, unfortunately. She is not the young lady that her parents certainly raised her to be. But oftentimes, you might as well bring dead people out there to entertain. They were bringing out all of these acts that I guess the guys in the NFL office liked, but they're not current. And they'd bring people out who hadn't been stars in 20 years, put them up on that stage. I hope that we get over that part of the game soon. I know that they feel that they've got to do it for all of those women who are watching, because they're not really watching for the football game. And all of you people who are watching for the commercials, get a life. You're listening to Bill Colley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 34 at our studios, 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. A couple of other things too quickly to wrap up the show in a few minutes. Would you like to get on the bus every day and go to work? It may happen. It may be coming to a city near you. Now, there's another one of those dead acts that played at the Super Bowl one year. Although he wasn't dead yet. His career was. 9:44, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 34. Have you ever heard the words sustainable development? I'll put it that way instead. When you hear someone use those words, sustainable development, number one, you can clearly tell that is somebody from the left that's trying to control every aspect of your life. Where you live, what you eat, what you drive. Because, of course, the world is coming to an end, and they know it, and the rest of us don't know it, so they have to ensure that they bring us into line and that we follow the plan, because somehow God has enlightened them. If there is a God, because in their world there usually isn't. Well, I bring this up because Michael Barone, who is a wonderful, wonderful news columnist with the Washington Examiner, has a piece today, Transportation Mode of the Future, the Bus. And he's pointing out that people are trying to promote the notion of trains, using rapid rail, and not only between downtowns and subways, but they're talking about building massive rail systems, rebuilding passenger rail in this country to travel from city to city, with the goal being that everyone will have to live in a high-rise near the train in order to get on the train. That's called Agenda 21. Some of you are familiar with Agenda 21. And the notion is we're going to pack people into one small area. That way we don't have to repair a lot of roads. We can let a lot of roads go fallow. And that way we can eliminate automobiles, because automobiles are bad. You've been hearing that for a very long time. Even though, when I'm in an airplane or I'm riding on a train, I've never been able to say, all right, let's pull over here so I can go to the bathroom, stretch my legs, and eat at the diner. They won't let you do that. When I'm driving my car, I can actually pull over anywhere I want, and I can do those things. It's funny how that works. There's some independence there. There's a choice. Again, as I said earlier, choice being a synonym for liberty. You don't have that when you're stuck on a train. You can't stop it yourself. It has to be stopped by someone else, and they make that decision. Well, he's writing, he says that some people have been researching this, and they say there are better alternatives than trains, and they're likely less expensive, and that is the bus. There has been a significant increase in intercity bus lines in recent years, not just in the Northeast Corridor, but in places like Texas. And they make economic sense, according to the researchers, if you're doing a trip of less than 350 miles. I used to take the bus to work. I had a job about 25 years ago, and I had some car trouble, and I got so sick and tired of taking care of that lemon I bought. I shouldn't have bought the car. A guy my dad knew owned a car dealership, and I went to look at the car, and he told me how much it would cost me, and I said, I don't really have that kind of money. And he said, hey, your family and my family have been friends for a long, long time. So tell you what, I'll knock the price down $1,000. And I bought it. And then when the thing turned out to be a lemon, I couldn't do anything about it because Mr. Mignano ended up in federal prison and lost his car dealership for some other. Well, he's boosting cigarette trucks and putting phony tax stamps on them and boosting oil trucks. You might get an idea that the business he was involved in, other than selling automobiles, was a little nefarious. So I couldn't go back and have any recourse on the car because the dealership was closed when he got sent off to federal prison. So I took the bus for a couple of years, 18 months, I guess it was, back and forth to work. And I ended up loving it. I could sit down with a cup of coffee, and in those days we didn't have Kindles and a lot of these highfalutin devices, but I would grab a newspaper and I would read the newspaper practically cover to cover on the trip to work. And then I'd get out of work at night, I'd walk 10 blocks back to the bus station, get on the bus, and I would take it back over the hill to my house. Seemed to work out and I think I paid $24 a week for that service, which was likely cheaper than I would have was on the gas I would have been buying at the time. But he goes on to say that, and this is my point about not being able to get off the train when you want to get a bite at the diner. Bus lines can start operating almost instantaneously, and more bus lines are opening for business every year. Rail lines are by definition inflexible. In other words, once you put the line in, they can't take a detour. Albeit, in my dating history, I knew some people who could make a train take a dirt road, but that's a story for another day. And he says there's a certain bossiness in the liberal backers of high-speed rail. They want most Americans to live in high-rises clustered around train and transit stations, which they have located in the places they think best. They think best. This is good for you. I know you don't like it, but it's good for you. They're treating you either like children or like the neighborhood dog, and that's exactly what they've got in mind for us. Throw us a few scraps, put us in a tiny shelter, and walk us around on a leash. Again, dangerous people that we're dealing with. Mike Huckabee is coming up in just a moment with Huckabee Report, brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. You can reach them at 736-6563. That's 736-6563. And if I could just set the table for what's coming up the remainder of the day, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Rush Limbaugh following news at 10 o'clock, news from Fox. Sean Hannity following news at 1 o'clock, and then Glenn Beck a bit later this afternoon. So we hope you can stick around for all of that. And I've got just a couple of minutes after the report coming up from Mike Huckabee. But if you'd like to, offer an opinion on that football game, the offer's still out there for you to give me a shout. The telephone number being 736-0300. That is 736-0300. Or if you'd like, email me your pick. In fact, if you'd like to email me your pick following the show, but before the game on Sunday, we can sit down on Monday and figure out who was closest. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. Bill Colley with you for a couple of more minutes this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story. I had, and maybe I need to back off on this. Earlier I said people who only watch the Super Bowl to watch the commercials, they need to get a life. I'd said that. Well, some of those commercials, I'm not putting the commercials down. Some of them are rather creative. In fact, if you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, there's a story about an upcoming Snickers commercial. Now, you've seen these commercials where somebody is not themselves until they get a bite of the Snickers, and then all of a sudden, they're themselves again. The late Robin Williams, actually, was in one of those commercials. And you probably have seen Johnny Manziel, the awful quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, as well, in one of those commercials. Well, this one features the cast of the Brady Bunch. What they've done, these are actual clips from the original TV series, but Marcia is being played by Danny Trejo, who he has caused mass mayhem in some movies he's been in the last few years. And then, was it Marcia? She's the oldest one, right? And then the sister Jan is being played by Steve Buscemi. And once they have the Snickers, they go back to being their old characters after that. Steve Buscemi, if you didn't know this, who's played some rather bizarre characters in movies and television over the years. He's got a show right now called Boardwalk Empire on cable. And he's actually, for the first time in his life, a leading man. But he's normally played nasty characters. Or characters, he played a character who was a potential child molester in one film. He was one of the killers in Fargo. He's not always played nice guys. Steve Buscemi, before becoming an actor, was a New York City firefighter. And after 4 years as a firefighter, he got offered an acting job. Then it became his career, so he left firefighting. But this is the type of guy he really is. In 2001, after the attacks in New York City, when the fire department there was just decimated, after losing so many firefighters in the collapse of the World Trade Center, Buscemi went back to work. He showed up one day with his gear and said, "I know you need help, and I'm here to help out." And he spent about a year working with the fire department on the trucks, going back and fighting fires like he had done before he'd become an actor. And I think sometimes when it comes to Hollywood celebrities, we're a little negative on them, and sometimes you have to hear the good side of things that they actually do. Also today, Matt Lauer was on the Today Show, and he was grilling Kevin Costner, who, by the way, is no liberal. Costner may have played in movies where he had a liberal character, but he has been a long-time Republican activist. And Costner had criticized Michael Moore in an interview, and they asked him if he would do it again on the program on the Today Show, and Costner refused. And then when he was asked why, he said, "Because I didn't come here to talk about that. I came here to talk about a movie." He said, "Well, you've been giving your opinion on this already." And Costner said, "That's because people have been asking me." There you go. In other words, he's an actor. He's not there necessarily to try and convince you to vote one way or the other. And he's not going to lead himself or let himself be led into being one of those people in Hollywood who has an opinion about everything. And sometimes, you just want them, as Laura Ingraham once said, to shut up and sing. Just stand back and do what you were hired to do. Rush Limbaugh, as I mentioned, coming up in just a few minutes following news at 10 o'clock. That'll be from the Fox Radio Network. Sean Hannity after the 1 o'clock show. 1 o'clock news, rather. And then again, Glenn Beck this afternoon. God willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back here on Monday morning. Bill Colley on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. At 9:58, we've got 34.